Hi everyone, welcome again. In this video, we will talk about application properties. We'll learn how to work with application properties using Spring Boot. So let's start. First of all, let's talk about what are application properties. Application properties are key value pairs that we provide or write in an application. So you see here we have defined two sample properties with different keys, key 1, key 2, and their corresponding values, value 1 and value 2. But why do we need application properties in any application? So properties help us to make the code configurable. It helps us to avoid hard coding of certain things. Maybe we want to pass the, let's say, access key, the database URL, or maybe some API key. So things like that should not be hard coded in the application. And that's where we use application properties. So we can create properties. We can just provide the value in the property file and we can read that property instead of hard coding that value. So in case, let's say if there is any change in that property, we can simply change the value at one place without cascading that change throughout the code base. Let's see an example of that. Here, if you see, I have an existing project, and in this project, there is this file application.properties. And in this property file, I have defined three properties. So this is the key, equal sign, and this is the value. The name of the property could be anything. It's up to us. If it's a predefined property, then the name must match. Or if we are creating a custom property, then the name could be anything. So in this case, the name of the first property is spring.datasource.username and the value is root. The second property is spring.datasource.password and the value is this one. And similarly, the third property is for the data source URL where we are providing the database URL. Now the good thing is in future, if we need to change the password, then we can simply change the password in this properties file for this property and there will be no change required anywhere because the application is accessing this value using this key. That is the main benefit of property files. Properties make the application configurable. Let's move on. Now that we understand the application properties, let's talk about how Spring Boot simplifies reading properties. So if we are providing some properties, how can we efficiently read the properties without much hassle? Same as many other things, Spring Boot simplifies reading the properties. The simplest way to read a property is using @value annotation. We'll see a demo of this one, but right now let's focus on different ways that Spring Boot provides to work with properties. So we can use @value annotation to read a property in the Java code. The second way is to use the environment class, which is provided by the Spring library. The third option is a slightly different one, to use the @configuration properties. Using @configuration properties, we can map the properties to a Java bean. Now the main benefit of @configuration properties is to map the properties to a Java bean. If we have a corresponding Java bean, then we can navigate through the properties. We can use the properties using getters and setters. And the second benefit that we get from a Java bean is the type safety. So if a particular property must be integer, then mapping that property to a Java bean property will make sure that it remains integer and nobody does something like alphanumeric by mistake. All right. The next thing that we need to understand is property resolution. So let's say there are various places where we can define the properties. Application.properties file is one place where we write the properties. Then we can define some properties as environment variables, operating system environment variables. We can also define properties using system class, which is called Java system properties. So we can set the properties using system.setProperties. Similarly, we can use the command line arguments to pass some values. Now, what happens if a certain property with the same name exists at different places at the same time? So if we have a property with the same name in application properties, and let's say via command line arguments, then how does Spring Boot resolve that value? Will it read from the application properties or will it override the value with command line argument? Now the rule is defined in the Spring Boot documentation, and which is represented here using this arrow, which means that if you follow the line, then the property that comes later can override the previous value. It means if the same property exists in Java system properties, and application properties, then Java system property can override the value of application properties. Similarly, if we pass the same key using command line arguments, then that will have the greatest priority. All right. Now that we have covered the theory part of it, let's move on and see a quick demo on it. Let's start by creating a new project. So we go to the Spring Initializer and we'll select the options that we need. I'll go with Maven and the latest Spring Boot version, which is 3.1.1. Then I'll provide the details and the name of the artifact, Spring Boot properties, and Java 17. We don't need additional dependencies because it's going to be the simple Spring Core project. We are simply reading the properties. We don't need additional dependencies. So let's hit the generate button, generate the project and open it in IntelliJ. So here I am, unzip the folder, and now if I go to the project, I can simply open it with IntelliJ. Trust the project, new window, and this will now configure the project in IntelliJ. So this is a simple skeleton project. It doesn't have anything. If we open the pom.xml, it simply has the Spring Boot starter parent, which is this one, nothing else. And if we go to the src main Java and resources, so this is the plain Spring Boot main class annotated with @Spring Boot application and a blank application.properties. So because the demo is on the properties, we'll be using this file to add the properties. Before we do that, let me do one more thing. So we'll use command line runner. We'll annotate it with @bean return like this. Okay. Now let me add a new package and a simple class that we'll use for the demo. Handler, and let's name it property handler. And this is going to be a Spring Bean. So we'll annotate it with @component. Now in the command line runner, we'll have the access to application context, and we can use this application context to get the class, the bean that we created, handler get bean property handler.class, and we'll create a dummy method in this one. Let's say run. So let's create the method in the bean. All right. Now we have the basic setup. So what we did, we created a new bean property handler, and in the main class, we created the command line runner so that we can access the application context, get the instance of this bean, and simply trigger the execution. So this method does nothing as of now, but in future, we'll add some logging messages in this one. Okay, so how do we add the properties using Spring Boot? To do that, we need to add some properties first. And in a Spring Boot application, it provides this application.properties file in src resources. And if we add a property in this file, Spring Boot will automatically read it and it will make it available for us to read and to work on this one. So let's add a couple of properties in this properties file. So we'll say property 1 equals to value 1 and property 2 equals to value 2. We defined two properties in the application.properties file. This is the name of the property, property 1 and property 2, and these are the corresponding values, value 1 and value 2. Now let's try to read these properties in this bean. Okay. We know that these are string properties. So what we can do, we'll define or declare two string variables. We'll say prop1 and prop2. Name could be anything. These are simple string variables. Now what Spring Boot does, it says that you can read the values by using @value annotation. So in this one, we follow the syntax and we provide the property name here, property1. This is the name of the property and we'll give this name to the value @value annotation like this. And similarly to second variable, but this time the name of second property, which is property2. So what Spring Boot will do, it will read the application.properties. It will see that there are two properties and it will store these properties in the context somewhere. And the main thing is these properties are available to us. And when we need it, we can use @value annotation. And here it says that read the property1 and assign its value to this string variable. And similarly, read the property2 and assign its value to prop2 variable. So what we can do, we can simply print the properties like this, prop1 and prop2. Okay, and now if we run the program, we see that it ran the application, and in the logs we see value 1 and value 2, which is the value of property 1 and property 2. So we defined two properties in the application.property file, and notice that we did not write anything, any IO operation to read and write the file. All right, this is all handled by the Spring Boot. What we did, we used @value annotation, provided an expression to read the property. This is the name of the property, and Spring Boot will bind the value to the variable. So that's how simple it is to read the properties in Spring Boot. And this is only one way, using @value annotation. Let's move on and see how can we use environment class to read the property files. So environment class is another way to read the properties file in a Spring application. To do that, we won't add any new property. We'll reuse the same properties, property1 and property2, but in the bean, along with this @value annotation, will auto-var the environment class. Because this class is fully managed by Spring Boot, it is available to us. We can simply auto-var it where we need it, like this. If you notice, this is coming from org.springframework.co.inv. So we can auto-var an instance of environment class, and now we can use this auto-varred reference variable to access the properties. So let's do that. Environment dot, you see it has a method get property and it accepts a key. What is the key? Key is the name of property. So if you go to the application.properties, this is the name that we need to provide. So we'll say get me the property with name property1 and from environment class. Let's add a separator here. Like this. And similarly, read the second property using environment. And let's run the program. And we see it correctly printed the property value 1 and value 2. Now let's move on and see how can we use @configuration properties annotation to bind properties and a Java bean. We have defined two properties in the application.properties file. And let's say instead of using these properties like this, which means using @value annotation or by using environment, we want to bind these properties to a Java bean so that we can use the corresponding values with the help of an object. What that means, let me show it to you. So we have two properties with name property1 and property2. So what we'll do, we'll create a config package. And in this package, we'll create a class, let's say and we name it my properties. It's up to us. In the my properties class, we'll annotate it with @configuration properties. And in this class, we'll define some properties like this: public string, and the name must match. So the name of the variable is going to be property1, like this. And for second property, it must be 2. So what we did, we created a class, used @configuration properties annotation, and we created 2 variables, string variables, and name of these variables match with the name of property. So property1 and property2. Okay, now let's create the getters and setters. All right, next what we'll do, we'll go to the main class, and we need to add another annotation here which says configuration properties scan. Now we need to provide the package path where Spring can find the corresponding Java bean. So this is in the config package. We can copy the package and go to the main class, and let's provide the path here. Now what happens when we start the application, Spring will go to this package and it will see that this class is annotated with @configuration properties. Next, it will check the properties in the context, and whatever matching property it can find, it will bind those properties to these variables. All right. And in this case, because there are 2 properties with the matching name, so it will initialize a new instance of my properties. It will call the setters like this, and it will bind the corresponding properties with these variables that we can access as a normal Java bean. So let me generate the setter and getter for second property as well. Okay. How do we use this property file? Where we need it, we can auto var it, because it's a bean, it's a configuration bean. So we can auto var it my properties. And now let's add a separator first. And now we can use it same as any other class. So we can say my properties dot get property1, and similarly get property2. Okay, now let's run the program. And we see the correct output as we expected, value 1 and value 2. Okay, now that we have covered how to read properties, let's move on to the resolution part. This one, where we saw how Spring Boot resolves the properties when it finds a matching property in different contexts. Here we saw if a property is defined in the application.properties, and if the same property is defined in Java system properties as well, then this can override the application.properties. Right? And if the same property is passed by the command line arguments, then it has the greatest priority and it can override Java system properties and application.properties. So let's see this thing in action. Here we have defined 2 properties in application.properties. Let's try to override one of them, property1. So if we go back to this, it says that if we set the same property, let's say in Java system properties, then it can override the application.properties. So what we'll do, we'll go to the main class, and before starting the application, we can test it by setting the same property using system.setProperties as a Java property. So let's provide the name, which must be the same name, otherwise it will be treated as a different property. And right now the value is value 1, so we'll change it in order to differentiate it, and we'll say from system property. Okay, what we are doing, we are setting a new property but with the same name using system class of Java. So this is Java system property with a different value. And if we run the program now, what do you think we'll see in the output? Is it this value, value 1, or this value from system property. Let's run the program and check the output. So we see the value 2 remains untouched because there is a single property in the context which is defined in the application.properties file, this one, but the value 1 has been changed. That means system.setProperty that we did here, it replaced the existing value which was defined in the application.properties file. It doesn't matter if we are using @value annotation or environment class or using configuration properties, all of them are returning the same value from system property, which means if the same property exists in application properties and in the system property, then the system property will have more priority. Okay, and that's what we saw here. Here we see that command line arguments can even replace the Java system properties. So what happens if we pass the same property using command line arguments? Let's see that as well. To do that, I'll go to my configurations, and here in the program arguments, I'll pass a new argument with the same name. So in the program argument, I'll say --, name of the command line argument, because we need to keep the name same. So it will be property 1 and its value. And I'll say from command line. Okay, and run the program. And this time we see the value 1 has been changed to from command line. Earlier it was from system property, but now it is from command line. From the output, it is clear that the command line arguments have the highest priority. So that's the resolution process of Spring Boot when it finds the matching name. Hope it was helpful. In this video, we saw how to work with application properties using Spring Boot. So we learned different ways to read the properties in a Spring Boot application. And then we saw the resolution process of Spring Boot in case there is a conflict. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.